Hey guys, this is Courtney from Will's Boom, and today we're going to jump into the charts of Jada Pinkett Smith and her husband Will Smith. And the reason I want to particularly focus on them is because the recent event where Will Smith slapped Chris Rock at one of these award shows. And I feel like it showed a lot about their relationship and brought the relationship under intense scrutiny. And so I did want to kind of illustrate, first of all, their connection and their dynamic. And also what maybe leads Will to be under Jada's thumb in some ways, and how that event in particular, we're going to look at that day, that transit to that day. And we're going to look at that day in particular and see why that event happened. What was being triggered in Will's chart and in Jada's chart, but especially Will, for this to take place, and how this is actually related to childhood. And so we're going to see all of these elements as well as their synastry today, but we're first going to look at each individual chart. So let's go ahead and start off with Jada. So we can see that Jada is born on a new moon, and that's because her sun and moon are both in the sign of Virgo. They're 10 degrees apart still, so it's approaching a new moon. It's not quite a new moon, but essentially she is born on a day when there is very little, I guess virtually no light in the sky at that time. So we can see that this might make her a more intuitive person because she is operating in kind of in the darkness in some ways. Venus in her chart is very strong. Venus is a relationship planet and is in a sign that it loves to be in. And it's in the 10th house, so it's extremely prominent. So there is something that is an asset to her when related to Venus. So her relationships become an asset or become a way for her to grow in prominence because this relationship planet is very strong in this sign and in this house. And it's in the 10th house of reputation and career. So we can see that her relationships can do a lot for her within her career. And we can also see that her womanhood, her looks, all of those things can also help her move forward. Her physical image, all those things will again help her career. When we look though at her relationship a little bit more, we're going to take a deeper dive to look at the aspects Venus is making to other planets. And we're also going to look at her specific relationship planet. So for everyone, Venus is going to represent partnerships. But each person has their own relationship planet, which is the ruler of their 7th house cusp. So the ruler of her 7th house, which we can see Gemini is a sign on her 7th house of relationships, and the planetary ruler of Gemini is Mercury. So her specific relationship planet is going to be Mercury. So we need to look at Mercury, what's going on with this planet and its aspects, in order to get an even fuller picture of her relationships. So let's first flush out Venus and then we'll get around to Mercury. So we can see Venus is strong, Venus is doing really well. However, Venus is also very close to the sun. It's 6 degrees away. A planet within 8 degrees of the sun is considered combust the sun. This planet, Venus in particular, while it is combust or blinded by the light of the sun because it's so close to the sun in the sky, you can't actually visibly see Venus anymore because the sun is so bright and shining so bright that you cannot see it. So while this is taking place, it's also an elevated Venus in the sign of Libra and in the 10th house. So the typical meaning of combustion is going to be less negative because Venus has other positive attributes going on. So essentially what's happening here is Venus combust the sun is going to create oftentimes a lack of affection growing up. And sometimes this will just signify, one or more parents not being very good at giving hugs or praise and kind of like the little ways of showing that you are loved. So that doesn't mean that their needs won't be met. It doesn't mean that they won't have support. It just means that the ways of really showing affection and adoration and charm to that person are kind of dulled oftentimes. And actually I was looking up Jada's history with her parents, and she said that her mom never incorporated physical touch into the relationship. And so this is an aspect of that. On top of this, Venus is also next to Pluto. Pluto is a planet that is associated with power, control, and obsession, intensity, jealousy, deep emotional connection, but also fear as well. And oftentimes when I see Venus combined with Pluto, somebody may have had a childhood in which there was intense love represented between the parents, which can sometimes show up as deep love and connection, but also sometimes deep love mixed with volatility, mixed with jealousy or even abuse. And we can see in particular with Jada that her father was abusive to her mother. And so we can kind of see this here because the representation of the mother in the chart is going to be seen from the moon in particular, but also the 10th house and Venus as well, because Venus is representing the feminine archetype. And who is the first person who creates that feminine archetype in our lives? Our mother, typically. And so we can see here with Pluto, this planet of control and sometimes abuse is in contact with the feminine planet here. So we can see that the father was abusive to the mother, and that this now incorporates into her relationship dynamic, because Venus is also a planet of femininity and relationships, and as well money. So we can see maybe she's quite money hungry, maybe she really enjoys power within her relationships, maybe she will attract, sometimes something in our chart will represent someone else, maybe she will attract a controlling partner. But in her case in particular, because it's in the 10th house, I do think it may be more representative of her and her nature. And Venus is also making an exact sextile, pretty much exact, to her Neptune and Jupiter right here on her ascendant. So she may attract a very powerful partner, but she also might be a little bit jealous and controlling, and all of those fearful energies, those can come out within her relationship as well if she's in the lower consciousness of her Pluto. However, because it's also making a beautiful sextile to Jupiter and Neptune, she is going to have a higher result from her relationships. So instead of getting caught in the same web as her mother did, attracting an abusive partner or being abusive straight up to her partner, I see her elevating past this and receiving much more benefits and much more spiritual love and support and insight from these spiritual planets, Jupiter and Neptune. Both of them are religious and spiritual in meaning. Both of them give optimism and idealism. And so she is also going to feel this way in love, as well as attract a partner who may experience these things as well, who may look at the glass half full, who may idealize her, and she may idealize them. So these are all potentials within the relationship, as well as having an artistic expression within the relationship, as well as maybe having just grand visions with her partner and building something big with her partner. And that also feeding into her sense of prestige and her kind of role within society, and the way that people look up to her, the way that she makes an impact. So all these things are kind of playing into each other. So the other thing, though, is that sometimes there can be an element of illusion that comes in, and being maybe overly optimistic about something. There, even though this is a positive aspect, and Jupiter is super, super strong here, that doesn't mean that Neptune can't bring in a sense of being overly idyllic in the way that you view a relationship. So that is a potential, although it's not going to be as big of a potential for her given the rest of her chart. So now let's go ahead and look at her relationship planet, which is particular to her, which is going to be Mercury, because again, it's the ruler of Gemini. So Mercury is very strong in its home sign of Virgo. And it's in the 9th house, a very prominent house, and a house that Mercury is going to feel comfortable in, because while it is home to Sagittarius, there is some element of learning, teaching, communication. That's the underpinning of the 9th house. So Mercury here is very strong. It's in a house of optimism. And so she has a lot of positive influences for relationships given this. She's likely to, attract someone intelligent, maybe somebody who's hardworking, who's very disciplined, who works on their health, who's optimistic overall. However, her Mercury is also making a square to Saturn. So there is also this pessimism that can come in here. It can create delays or hardships within the relationship. She might be somebody who would meet somebody when she's older. I'm not sure how old she was when she met Will. But it also creates like this conflation between areas of work and relationships, because Saturn is a planet of commitment and of work. So this is good and bad, because on one hand, it makes her extremely loyal, committed, and undying in her pursuit of a relationship. And it's also a square with a malefic planet. So there is always going to be this element of relationships feeling like a burden, relationships feeling like a lot of responsibility, like a lot of work, like they really hold her back or hold her down, but also they build her up in many ways as well. And it's oftentimes that we see this when we think about things that add to our responsibility in life and our reputation. They build us up while also putting constraints on us. And so these things have been conflated within her, in her psyche and in her life. And so she might attract partners who are critical, or she may be critical within the relationship as well. Oftentimes, Saturn on the 7th house cusp can indicate attracting a critical partner, and we'll kind of get to this when we go to Will. But I do see that there may be that element here with him. She also, Mercury being in the sign of Virgo, is quite critical as well, like very critiquing eye. So she may be the one who's critical of him. So it's hard to say how it will manifest for sure, but it could come up within both parties. So overall, there is a sense of duty and intensity to her relationships that we're seeing. We do see this joy and optimism and artistic expression and high vibe that she really does have with these planets on her ascendant aspecting her Venus. So we see that being incorporated within the relationship, which adds a lot of fun. But overall, with her relationship planet making a square to Saturn, there is an underlying sense of duty that may trump everything, or that may be felt even as strong as the sense of optimism as well. So now let's look at Will, and then we'll look at their charts together. So Will has his sun in Libra. Sun does not like to be in the sign of Libra because it is our identity, which is unique to us, and it's in a sign associated with other people, with relationships. And so whenever we see someone's sun in Libra or planets in Libra, we can start to begin to understand that they are very relationship or other oriented. And that doesn't mean that the relationships are always going to go well. It just means that that tends to be a focus for them in their life. We can also see that he as well has Venus in Libra, so they have the same love language. They have the same sense of giving and receiving affection and what they desire from their partner. And his Venus is next to Mercury. So his Mercury is also in Libra. This I've also seen in Johnny Depp. This is somebody who will talk your pants off, who knows exactly the right thing to say, who's extremely personable, who's very creative, who knows how to weave being intellectual with being likable, with being charming. And all these things come together into a very gratifying image for other people. Whether that means that he's happy or not is another story. Will's sun is next to Uranus in Virgo. So whenever I see someone's sun or moon next to Uranus, there is an implication that there is some changeability in their character. And their life direction. For example, I have my moon next to Uranus, and I've been somebody who's traveled a lot and who moves every 2 years and can change my mind and emotions quite quickly. And Will has his sun next to Uranus, so he might take on unusual projects. He might be very busy, very stimulated. He might make sudden adjustments. But this is also usually going to be represented within your childhood as well. So what in his childhood was unstable or unknown? And that's what Uranus does, is it brings an element of being unknown. And we can see this coming in with the father because the sun is representative of the father. So we know that Will never knew which father he was going to get. And sometimes this can represent a particular instance of something happening during childhood, or it can represent that individual, so his father, or kind of just some, like I was mentioning, some big event in his life. So something ongoing, something within a person or a particular moment is going to create this unstableness within your character, or this changeability and this constant evolution within his character. And we can see this, he's written a book, he's done music, he's done movies, he's changed his career in many ways. He's done a TV show, like he's never really sat in one particular avenue for a very long time and not deviated. He is eclectic in his approach to his craft. So the way that we see this showing up with his father is that in some ways his father was abusive and would beat up his mother and would be very critical of him. And we see this in particular with Saturn, which we'll get to that in a second. But his father would be quite negative in these ways. And then there would be other ways in which he would push him to be driven and ambitious and hardworking and do even better. And he would show up to all of his movie events and his recitals or whatever he went to. And he would be sober for those things and supportive and his rock. And then in other ways, he would beat his mother until she bled in front of him, or he would be drunk and volatile. And so Will never knew which person he was going to get. And that's what created the sun with Uranus here. So there's something in Will that desires and craves a lot of change. And that's because as a child, his environment was very unstable. In particular, his father was very unstable. And so he's had to learn to adapt a lot and have a lot of attunement to others to recognize if it's safe or not, as well as a lot of just inherent change. And so that kind of becomes part of you as a person. And we can see his father's criticalness with Saturn here, because Saturn is often representative of dynamics with our father. And so he has Saturn opposite Venus and opposite Mercury. This is a challenging placement to have. This is where we can see the criticalness and the perfectionism come in. So feeling like you're never doing good enough, feeling like you never are enough, especially because Saturn is in the sign of Aries, which has to do with individuality and the self. We can see it's also retrograde. So whenever I see Saturn retrograde, I'm seeing boundary issues coming into play. So who am I? What's my identity? And that can be like rather viscous or rather porous for someone with Saturn retrograde in Aries in the 11th house opposite these planets. It's the criticalness of the father that can make one uncertain of oneself. And being in the 11th house, there's a desire to just belong, to just fit in with a group, with a crowd. And that can make your own identity even more uncertain. And Saturn opposite Mercury and Venus can starve one for love and affection, can make one have to work or earn love and affection, can make one feel like relationships are work, relationships are hard, just like we saw in Jada's chart, but with her relationship planet. This is coming in with the way that Will receives love, receives that nectar of support and nurturing. And so we can see that in particular with words as well, because it's opposite Mercury. The father may have used and must have used really harsh words with him in order to kind of get him in line. And because Venus and Mercury are together, this has a lot to do with his craft, his artistry, and the way that he kind of represents himself on screen. So having Saturn opposite these planets does create that sense of discipline. Although he may oscillate between being hard on himself and uncertain about himself, and then with Saturn in the 11th house, like, I don't know if I belong, I feel alone, I feel misunderstood, I'm not good enough. And then he'll oscillate between I'm actually doing really well, I'm good at my craft, I'm expressing myself very well, I feel like I belong. So he has these two polarities that are always going to be at least a little bit at play in his life, and it's his journey to integrate them and to be at ease with them together. So we can see that the perfectionism, the criticism, the requiring hard work coming from his father did hone his craft and did really help him. And so in one way, his father was his role model, and in another way, he was his tormentor. And we can particularly see how Will views his mother by looking at his moon in Scorpio with Neptune there. Moon Neptune is a difficult placement at times. It can make one, especially in a water sign like Scorpio, it can make one very emotional and almost too sensitive. And this is something that you would not think with Will, right? He's so funny, he's so personable. You wouldn't think that underneath all of it, all of his charm was a highly, highly sensitive soul. But that's what I see with Moon Neptune conjunctions. And in particular, when we're talking about his mother, he was very attuned to the pain of his mother. And he may have felt that his mother was a victim, because Neptune is a planet of being a martyr or a victim, as well as being someone's savior. So the moon representing the mother in the chart is indicating that he saw his mother as a victim, and part of his life journey was and is understanding how he may try to be his mom's savior. And I was reading an article where he talked about how his mother got beat up right in front of him. He couldn't do anything, or he didn't do anything. And he always told himself he would avenge her, the brutality that she faced. And that you can see this coming out in the sign of Scorpio, which is vengeful, which is protective, which is wanting to guard the thing that it loves the most, including itself. So we can see Will really has his guard up in many ways with his moon in Scorpio, but Neptune there, he's letting a lot in emotionally. But he doesn't maybe necessarily want everyone to know it. And doesn't necessarily want to always wear his heart on his sleeve, because the vulnerability here can feel dangerous. And so we can see this playing a very, very common theme in his life is, I need to protect my mother because I didn't as a child. And we will see this come up in his relationship with Jada, how she then becomes the mother figure that he needs to protect, that he needs to save from the abuse. And so when this whole thing happened with Chris, we can see why all of this went down. We can see why, we can turn to Jada and blame her and think, she has him whipped and she looked at him a certain way and he went up and did all this. But there's a lot going on here psychologically to explain the emotional overreaction and stimulation that was happening at that time for that outburst to occur. And I'm not condoning it. I'm just trying to get to the psychological underpinnings of why something like that would happen for someone who's so charming, who's so personable, who's so well liked as Will Smith. Okay. Will also saw himself as a coward. And this is a description that he gave himself as a result of experiencing his mother's abuse and not being abused and not doing anything about it. And Moon Neptune can have a little bit of this feeling to it of cowardice. And it's not necessarily that they're cowards. It's more so a passive placement. I love everyone. I understand everyone. I'm highly sensitive. I'm emotional. I'm in tune with those around me. And that usually leads to less action. As a result, I'm not going to necessarily embody as much of this Scorpio moon energy to protect those I love unless I'm stepping up into the savior energy of Neptune. But in general, Neptune does show passivity. So we can see his mother being passive, the victim, but we can also see why he would see himself that way, because the moon is representing himself internally. So let's look at his relationship planet. So his descendant is in Jupiter, or Sagittarius, which means that his relationship planet is going to be the ruler of Sagittarius, which is Jupiter. Jupiter is in the sign of Virgo, doesn't necessarily like to be in the sign of Virgo. Jupiter is conjunct Pluto, not necessarily the easiest placement to have a relationship planet next to. And it's also making a sextile to his moon and Neptune, this placement that we just talked about. So what we can see playing out in his relationship dynamics is, first of all, this whole situation with his father and his mother, because his mother is represented by this moon Neptune and the abuse that she was a victim to. And then Jupiter is next to Pluto, a planet that is very controlling, that is very manipulative, that can be fear-inducing, that can also be indicative of abuse. And so his relationship planet, the person that he is either going to be or attract in a relationship, is going to have some of these tendencies and is going to bring out this sextile with the moon and Neptune. So first of all, this partner is going to be very loving, very caring, artistic. This is Jada. She has her Venus making a beautiful trine or sextile to Neptune and Jupiter. So she has these elements. She is uplifting. She is loving. But there's also this controlling aspect here as well. And so it's really shining the light between the two variations of his parents that's coming out particularly with his relationships in this lifetime. But Jupiter-Pluto also makes one very attracted to powerful people, people who feel confident, people who take up space, people who magnetize others and kind of control a room with their energy. And we will definitely see that with Jada because she has her sun conjunct Pluto. So let's look at them together. So we can see Jada has sun conjunct Pluto, which I can't remember if I talked about this already, but this, I believe I did. But this is classic for somebody who is very powerful. Sometimes they are psychic as well, very intuitive, very magnetic, maybe even sexual in nature. Like people find them very seductive, like a Black Moon Lilith type of energy, like a you can't touch this, but like a dark beauty kind of thing, if that makes sense. Femme fatale. But there's that intrigue here. But there's also her power to manipulate, to understand others emotionally and intellectually to the point where she can then utilize that against them if she wants to. That doesn't mean she will, but she has this power within her. And then he will tend to attract partners like this because of his relationship planet being by Pluto. So for her, it's with her sun, it becomes part of her identity. For him, it's next to his relationship planet, so it becomes part of his partner's identity. So we can already see why they attract each other. One of these elements here is this power play that Will is kind of replaying in his childhood to his adult life. We can also see that Jada's sun is on his Pluto. So this is kind of a direct link here where we're like, okay, it's on his Pluto, it's on his Jupiter. So her sun, her way of being, her identity matches his relationship planet. They're both in the sign of Virgo. They're both within 5 degrees of each other. So they both have, so essentially Will's partner that is most ideal in his chart, in his mind, is embodied by Jada's sun, is embodied by who Jada is, how she presents herself, how her light shines. That is who Will is attracted to. So we can see why there is this intrigue, and we can see also Pluto being there is bringing out those power play dynamics from childhood. Will's sun is on Jada's Venus. So Will's personality being quite charming, maybe attuning to her very well, being affectionate. These things are very, they're very attractive for Jada. because she didn't get that affection during childhood, she needs an affectionate partner. She needs someone to attune to her, to dote on her, to be artistic, to be expressive, to be a people person. That's what she likes, and that's what Will represents. So she is able to essentially receive his love well, and she gives affection to him in a way that boosts him and his ego as well. So a lot of love connections here, actually. Her idea of what romance and love should look like, putting partnerships first, is what Will naturally does. Will's moon and Neptune, which I also mentioned was representative of his mother's relationship and her victimhood and all of this. His moon Neptune is making an exact sextile to Jada's sun. So Neptune is 24, her sun is 25, so they're pretty much in an exact sextile to each other. So this is going to create the idealism. This is going to really like have him look at her, and vice versa, in a way of, you know, my partner is just amazing, and really lifting each other up. And because this is related to the mother, it's also going to bring that archetype of I need to save her, I need to fix this, I need to protect her, nurture her. All of this is going to be placed also on Jada because of this connection here. So it's directly stimulating this event from childhood related to his mother. And so we can see again why he's so protective over her. And I think that because when I was looking at these charts, I'm like, okay, so because this is the reason why he's wanting to save her, to protect her because of his mother, because he never got to do that with his mother, I know that there is going to be something transiting these planets here in order to activate this remembrance of his childhood and make him very angry. So we know that that's what's going to be happening on the day that he slapped Chris. Will's Mars is squaring Jada's Saturn. So this is challenging because our Mars is our personal willpower. It's our sexuality. It's our manhood. It is our anger. It's our animalistic, expressive side. So Will already has a little bit of an outlet for this in the sign of Virgo to be a little bit like more pointed or disciplined or organized or health oriented. It's not as like sloppy, messy as like Mars in a different sign could be. Maybe Mars in Leo, Mars in Aries, just kind of doing whatever it wants in that moment. It's a little bit more like defined or refined. So he has almost like a refined manlyhood and sexuality to him, but it's making a square to her Saturn. So there's something about her that is going to try to repress this side of him. So even though it is refined, she might try to squash it in some way. So if he ever gets angry, she might not allow him to get angry. If he ever, tries to be like highly sexual and sweep her off her feet, I think that would work because it's also squaring her ascendant, which I'll get to in a second. But there may also be times in the relationship with the square to Saturn where she shuts him down. She hurts his manhood, this kind of thing. And so we can see this also with her being interested in having other partners. It's like this is hurting his ego, his manhood, his sense of confidence, which is all Mars energy. So she will actually restrict and put a damper on these parts of himself. And so this is going to happen, especially in a relationship where there's not a level of consciousness and awareness around these elements in the chart. I'm always going to say kind of what I see maybe in a more intense light, and that's going to assume that this person has done not very much work around these parts of their chart and their relationship. And if they have, a lot of these things can take on a different light, especially if they are channeled into different outlets. So just keep that in mind. If you have this in your chart with your partner, it doesn't have to mean a death sentence. It's just something that we have to learn to work with. So Saturn is a critical planet. It likes to critique and judge others. So wherever you have Saturn is where you might judge yourself. Especially if it's in the 7th house or 11th house, you might actually get judgment from others and painful situations from others. So her planet of judgment is affecting his planet of expression and his wildness and lacking inhibition. So in many ways, she may make him feel like his natural way of kind of letting it all out, of expressing his energy, of being ambitious, isn't good enough or isn't done right or whatever. He also, with his Mars squaring her ascendant, may be prodding and poking of her. So Mars is a planet of attraction. So squaring the ascendant, very positive for attraction. This is good for sexual stimulation. However, this is something that can be fleeting, especially with the square to Saturn. It might, get weighed down with that criticism over time and change. So this is their initial spark, their initial attraction. But Mars squaring the ascendant also is saying, my way of doing things is the right way, especially in Virgo, which is a very critical planet. So I could see him actually being quite argumentative with her, which is not something that you would really perceive with the relationship, and that's coming from a place of bias. So looking at it neutrally, I can see he would be quite argumentative with her, and maybe even not judgmental, but forceful, of trying to get her to maybe move in a certain direction in her life. The ascendant has to do with how we make decisions, the path we tend to choose to go on, the sun and the ascendant, as well as Mars. So these are our planets of drive, pushing us forward. Which direction are we going in? And Jada is a very Sagittarius kind of decider. That's her ascendant. She's going to think, I'm just going to go with the flow, or I want to go here and then I want to go there. Sagittarius sometimes may have this element of that Gemini has, where it's not like uber focused and refined and disciplined, where his Mars in Virgo is. So we can see Will is very successful, more successful than Jada. And so you can see he's trying to influence her. He's trying to say, honey, go here. Honey, do this. Honey, this is how you get your fire under control and channel it somewhere productive and useful that we can make money from, or whatever it is. And she's like, no, I don't want to do that. This is my flow. This is my fire. And he may kind of push her and aggravate her. And her Saturn is going to step in and be like, no, I'm not going to allow this to happen. I'm going to overpower your will, which is trying to overpower my will. So there is a little bit of a kind of power play happening here with these placements. Will's descendant is also on her ascendant. The descendant is our relationship line and represents our partner. And so Jada's way of being is aligned with his relationship desires, essentially. So we can see another overlap here of why they are attracted to each other, of why she represents in so many ways what he is looking for. And we can also see that his midheaven is on her north node. Exactly. Both at 14 degrees of Aquarius. So his career line, his image in the world, his public reputation is helping her move forward in life with being on her north node. In particular, her north node is in the 3rd house, which is the house of communication and very often public speaking. So we can see that his career elevated her ability to have the red table talk. And this was part of her divine purpose. And we can get more into that with Mars there, maybe being a little bit combative or ruffling people's feathers at times on this red table talk. And that's part of her purpose as well. Okay. Her Saturn is also on his ascendant. So Will's way of expressing himself, his Gemini energy, his kind of way of talking and having fun and all of that, his way of making decisions and analyzing and being objective, all of those parts of his personality will become under scrutiny with this Saturn placement here. However, Saturn is also a planet of dedication. And so this is a partner that will be committed to you. This is a partnership that will be very hard to let go of. Saturn is a glue or a cement And with so many Saturn contexts, it makes it harder and harder to just walk away. So that's good for the duration of a relationship, but it can be difficult because it can also weigh it down. So while you are committed and you are there and you are supportive of them, just like a teacher or a parent would be, you can also have that teacher or parent energy, which you tell them what to do. You know, you disagree with certain choices that they make or ways of behaving. There is this kind of authoritarian energy that comes in that can get old in a relationship. And so we can see this here. We can also see in ways in which she might drag him down or hold him back, because Saturn tends to do that as well. Jada's Mars is also on his midheaven. So we can see, as I mentioned before, she might kind of ruffle feathers, and that's part of her purpose. And we can see that actually will affect negatively her relationship with Will. And not her relationship with Will in particular, but Will's public image is what I mean to say. His midheaven is how the public sees him. And with Mars here, it's like Mars is a planet of combativeness. And so we can see that she's going to bring a sense of disagreement to the plot line of their life and to the way that he is perceived. Her Venus is also opposite. Oh wait, what? Yes, her Venus is also opposite his Chiron. So this is also very common in marriage partnerships. There's usually some kind of aspect between Venus and Chiron. That's because Chiron has to do with our childhood wounding. And what do we do when we look for a partner? We replay our parents. We look for someone who represents our parental dynamics so that we can fix them unconsciously in our minds in adulthood. So we can see this playing out here with them as well. And we also saw this with Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. They had a conjunction between Chiron and Venus. And this can also indicate that pain playing out again. So she may stimulate or trigger his childhood pain again for him to resolve. And in general, I think that people may find that Jada is quite intense with her Sun Pluto. Sometimes Sun Pluto can come across as a little bit abrasive or not everyone's cup of tea. And so that can also add to how he's perceived in their whole dynamic. Okay, so now let's go ahead and look at what happened when Will slapped Chris. All right, so let's first of all switch. Let's just look at Will's chart alone for a second. So do you remember how I mentioned that this part would be stimulated, the Moon-Neptune conjunction that was representative of his mother and her victimhood and his need to protect her? I knew this would be transited in some way. Remember when I said that? So we can see here we have the South Node in Scorpio right in between, sandwiched between these planets here. The South Node brings up the past. And it's our need to purge this element from the past. So this cycle is already representative of the past because of these planets here. And it's a node that's pulling, again, the past. So it's like, it's basically, there was no way to avoid this. This was going to come up in his life to be healed, to be dealt with, to be looked at, because that's what Scorpio does, is it purges things. It releases things from the bowels. It's literally like the things leaving our body. And so we can see this was all coming up again, coming to a head so that he would face this. And so this may have felt, again, very familiar. It may have felt like he was in that room watching his mother get beat and not doing anything. But this time, he looks over at Jada being insulted for her health condition, which in Chris's defense, he did not know about. And it was a joke and all this stuff. So obviously, like, Chris did not deserve to get slapped. But for Will, it was watching his mother again. But he looked over at Jada this time, saw her pain, saw her contempt in that moment. And he was like, this time, I will not repeat my pattern in childhood. This time, I will stick up for her. I will fight my dad. And he did, in a literal sense. He went up and he slapped Chris in the face. He fought him. And so this is all happening in his psyche. So we really have to give some element of grace here to what's happening. And again, this doesn't mean we have to condone it and all of this, but it means we have to give understanding behind how this can happen. And the moon is also right on his midheaven, both at 14 degrees of Aquarius. The moon represents the public. The midheaven represents our image, our public image. So we can see the public had all eyes on him at this time. So we can see everyone was tuned in. Everyone was talking about this. We also see that he had Saturn, Venus, and Mars all moving through his 10th house. Oh, wait, no. Is it his 10th house? No. It was moving over his midheaven, though. So it's all moving over, essentially, this area of his chart representative of his public opinion. And these can be planets of challenge, so two malefics, Saturn and Mars. And these planets were squaring his moon and Neptune conjunction. You see Saturn is at 21 degrees, and then Venus is there too, bringing in the relationships. Mars is there very loosely, but it's also squaring it. So all these planets are squaring moon and Neptune. What does this mean? Saturn brings about a checkpoint in our life. When Saturn squares the moon, we can tend to have this moment where we're kind of reflecting about our life choices, like especially in when it comes to who we are as a person inside and how we've showed up in our lives and how we feel about ourselves. Do we like ourselves? Do we like who we've been? It's giving us almost like this reality check moment and can sometimes be depressive. But we have Venus here as well, which is a relationship planet. So it's bringing in challenge to his relationships. And it's also bringing in Mars, which is a planet of combativeness. So we all experience this transit with these planets together. We may have all felt this weird energy around this time. However, it's making an exact square to his moon. So it's directly going to have an event happen in his life where these planets transpire externally, where he experiences something that triggers his inner dislike for himself, for something that he has not liked about his cowardice, which is moon Neptune, about his complacency or passivity in childhood. He was just a child, but he doesn't like that about himself. And so that Saturn squaring the moon was bringing that to the surface and asking him if he wants to make a change, if he wants to do something differently, how he wants to react. And he did react. And so we can see this was a very critical moment in his life and a painful one as well. On top of this, we can see that Mercury was conjunct his Chiron in his 11th house. So this is a lot about people talking, information spreading, and it being a source of pain for him. So painful things being said in the moment, triggering memories from the past, as well as painful things being said afterwards because, people had a lot to say. At this time, he's also having a Jupiter opposition. Jupiter, 20 degrees of Pisces, opposite his natal Jupiter. Remember, Jupiter is his relationship planet, you guys. So Jupiter in an opposition with itself is a time in its cycle where we are checking in about our growth. How are we growing as a soul? How are we evolving? What do we have left to learn? And checking in and seeing if we like where we're at in our learning journey. And being that this is his relationship planet, it's a time for him to reflect on the growth of his relationship and this dynamic. And again, it's opposite Pluto. So we got this Pluto energy here as well, this controllingness, this darkness coming in. So he might start to question what he's been learning about his relationship and about this manipulation and controllingness and darkness, how this is related again with this sextile to the moon, how this is related to his childhood, how all this is playing out. He's going to get a significant dose of awareness and learning from this event. Whether it's going to happen right away or not, I don't know, because Saturn is squaring his moon. Sometimes we get reality checks right away, but it is a square. So sometimes there's a little bit of friction or delay because of that. So maybe it took some time to integrate. Regardless, he's getting a real reality check about his relationships, his past, and all of this going on and how he's being triggered today. We also see that Pluto is transiting and in a square, an exact square, to his natal Mercury, which is here. Both are at 28 degrees. This is a very long transit and a very impactful one, especially because Mercury is the ruler of his ascendant. He's a Gemini ascendant. Mercury is his chart ruler. It's the planet responsible for a lot of his decisions and ways of thinking about life. And now Pluto is coming in here and pushing on it and saying, you can't think about life this way anymore because this whole thing is going to destroy the way that you perceive reality. And in particular, his Mercury is on his Venus, which is a relationship planet. So it's going to look at relationships with women and with money and with anyone. And it's going to put it under immense pressure to transform it. It's going to destroy the old way of doing things and looking at things and ask us to revive it and refine it. So this is a very big deal and a slow soul metamorphosis that he's undergoing. We can also see that he has Neptune opposite this Jupiter, opposite Pluto in particular. So this can also have to do with shifting of beliefs as well. And when we look at both of their charts, we can see that Uranus was making a square to Will's midheaven and Jada's north node. So his midheaven here, yeah. Squaring his midheaven north node. So Uranus 12 degrees, squaring midheaven north node at 14 degrees. It's not exact yet at the time of this event. But you can see that there's some big changes happening to the way that she shows up in the world, the way that people view her through her red table talk, all of that. That's all undergoing some massive changes, as well as his public image. And because it's not exact yet, it means that as Uranus continued to move forwards, his image was changed more and more. And it was unexpected. It was something that they could never predict because it's a Uranus, it's a square. So we can see how it's changing the way that their relationship is really perceived and under scrutiny. Now, looking in particular at Jada, we can see that Uranus is making a square, as I mentioned, to her north node, but it's an exact square to her Mars. So Uranus squaring Mars can be challenging because Mars is our self-esteem, our self-worth, our confidence, especially in the second house here for her. It has a lot to do with her passion, her fire, her will, her drive, her anger as well. And so it's very much stimulating and creating changes to these areas of her life. So it might have rocked her sense of self-confidence. It might have triggered her anger in an unexpected way. And all these things are being tested. In a lot of ways, her sense of confidence and her will are being tested in this moment. So are you the right one or are you the wrong one? You know, those things like around the ego can be very triggered at this time. And it's a time generally where we may have to face unexpected conflict and disagreements, because that's what Uranus is, and so or Mars is. And so Uranus is bringing this unexpected element of having to deal with random conflict that you may never have thought you had to deal with. Unexpected fights, but you may also get stimulated to try brand new ventures that make you more money because it's in the second house. Or you may get excited about pursuing more things with your children or making changes in your relationship with your children because Mars is the ruler of her fifth house of children. So this may change up her relationship with her children. It can bring her a lot of new creative ideas. So there's a lot that can come good out of this, especially because it's on the north node. So she might actually get more growth out of this. They're both going to get growth out of this, but he has some more challenges with that Saturn square his moon. Chiron is also opposite her natal Uranus right now. So we can see that this is going to bring in unexpected changes within the home and career front that can be painful and trigger childhood memories of pain. The North Node also was on her moon at this time. Or sorry, the moon was on her North Node, but I think I've already mentioned that. But this can, wait. Okay, yeah, never mind. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was Neptune was opposite her sun. And again, at this particular moment, it still has not reached the full opposition with her sun. It still has 2 degrees to go. So just like Uranus has 2 degrees to go before it squares her midheaven, Neptune has 2 degrees to go before it opposes her sun. What does that mean? In the following weeks, as Neptune opposes her sun and Uranus squares her North Node, we see changes in her life direction and identity. So as his public image begins to become a little bit volatile in the following weeks, her sense of self, her image of herself will start to be tested, because her image is largely based off of the public perception. It's in her career sector. She has a lot of power, influence. These are all things that are core to her self-understanding. It's through the public, through her career, through this stance that she has on the world, that she creates and builds her identity. And since this event has happened, for Will in particular, it's rewriting his relationship dynamic beliefs, his history with his mother. It's rewriting all those stories. For Jada, she has tried to gain some semblance of control over her life through having a powerful partner, through having a powerful influence, through having a name out there. And now those things are being tested because their image is starting to shift. For both of them, they have kind of their image is built on rocky waters a little bit here. But with Neptune opposite the sun, we're going to see her become confused. This is an existential crisis. This is the question of, who am I anymore? What is my next direction in life? What do I want? And sometimes we can even become ill because Neptune opposite the sun, which is our vital life force energy, can have us so far removed from our purpose, so far removed from our bodies and from this life, that we are forced to go internally. And oftentimes illness does that. It forces us to self-reflect. And so we can see that she's going through this process, this huge soul reconnection, essentially, where you're then asking the biggest questions of your life, of why is this happening? Who am I? What am I in this life for? What am I meant to pursue? And the best things at this time are really creative expressions, because they allow you to find yourself energetically, to express yourself energetically, to move through your emotions and experiences without really having to create a concrete and defined sense of self, because that is the exact thing that needs to undergo transformation. And so she's got to surrender and let go of control and allow herself to move through this experience until she can rediscover who she is. So that is what this experience meant for both of them. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys are interested in learning about your dominant planet, or the planet that best represents you in astrology, I have a super fun and insightful quiz linked down in the description box down below. And if you want to learn astrology from me, so you can read charts like this, or if you want to have it done for you, because I love reading charts, and I will be honest with you, then you'll find links for both of those things in the description box down below. I hope you guys have a beautiful, blessed day. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment down below what you think about this, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.